court. Apparently, LAPD did interview that Uber driver, and he denies having any recollection of that trip. He cannot definitively confirm that he dropped her off at that time, just after 10 p.m. that night, and he does not remember picking her up or driving her there. That is absolutely...
The Uber driver who picked up Celeste Rivas Hernandez on the night she disappeared does not remember the trip. He doesn't remember driving 80 miles from her home in Lake Elsinore to the Hollywood Hills. He doesn't remember dropping her off just after 10 p.m. on April 23, 2025. He doesn't remember her at all. I have to be honest with you. When I heard that today, I had to stop and completely re-examine what I thought I understood about this case. Because for months, that Uber ride was the fixed point. It was the detail that locked the timeline into place. And now we find out the only person in that car whose memory we could verify doesn't have one. But that was just the beginning of what came out of this preliminary hearing. Today, Judge Charlene Omeo ruled that there is sufficient probable cause to hold David Anthony Burke, the singer known as D4VD, to answer for first-degree murder with special circumstances, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, and unlawful mutilation of human remains. That means this is going to trial. But how we got there, and what the defense is already signaling, is something I did not see coming until the testimony started piling up over these last several days. Let me walk you through what we now know, what we still don't, and why a self-defense claim is suddenly the shadow hanging over every piece of evidence in this case. Celeste was 14. She had been communicating with David since she was 12, and according to the prosecution, their relationship became sexual when she was 13. The text messages presented in court, thousands of them, leave very little to the imagination on that point. The DA's office showed the judge images, videos, and conversations that established a continuous pattern of sexual abuse, and that charge, frankly, is the one with the most irrefutable hard evidence behind it. But the murder charge is where things get complicated, and it's where the defense began laying groundwork today that I want you to pay very close attention to. On the night of April 23rd, Celeste and David were arguing over text. She had seen social media posts of him with an influencer named Asia Collins, and she was furious. She demanded to see him in person. He told her he was busy, that his parents were visiting, that he was preparing for a trip to Singapore. She pushed harder.
We are talking during this lunchtime break. There's still some more arguments that are happening. At the time we're recording this, the judge hasn't made the decision about whether or not this is going to go to trial or not. I am made of questions regarding what happened this morning, because I'm starting to see potential holes in the prosecution's case, which I want to get to. So, Julie, good to see you. Let me just start here. We had LAPD Detective Corey Farrell back on the stand, talking about this plethora of text messages between David and Celeste. Thousands of messages. This is something that we were waiting to see. Talked about it on Friday, the images, the text messages. But today, he talked about the conversation leading up to April 23rd, when prosecutors claim David killed Celeste. Talk to me about what those conversations were.
This was so fascinating to me, Jesse, because opposing counsel here, the prosecution and the defense, they're presenting the exact same digital evidence here. They're presenting the same text message conversation between David and Celeste. And based on what these different attorneys are essentially cherry picking from these conversations, we are getting a very different view of what happened between the two of them and what was said the night before Celeste was allegedly killed. Now, first we heard from Beth Silverman, deputy DA prosecuting this case. When she had this LAPD detective, Corey Farrell, on the stand, they presented select text messages from hundreds, thousands of messages between the two during these 2 or 3 nights. And they were meant to basically just establish time, location, the two of them arguing, the two of them coordinating when and where to meet up, the two of them deciding on a pickup location for the Uber, and then Celeste alerting David when she apparently got into his home just after 10 o'clock in the evening on April 23rd, 2025, and asking him to let her in. So very basic facts there, just establishing the two of them were communicating, they were planning on meeting up, and Celeste said in her text message to David that she had arrived. Now, then on cross-examination, Blair Burke was questioning LAPD detective Corey Farrell, and she asked to show the court additional messages from that same conversation. That's where we started to get a little bit more color about the argument that has been referenced previously in the prosecution's charging documents. This is where we actually saw text messages from Celeste to David threatening him. Let me paraphrase for you some of this. In those messages that were shown to the court that Detective Farrell read to us, Celeste tells David that she's going to ruin his career. She tells him that she's going to tell her father lies about him. She tells him that she has contact information for his business associates and for his mother. She tells him that she's going to call his mother, Colleen Burke, and tell her damaging information about David. Now, we previously have not seen these messages. We didn't really have a sense of exactly what was said in the argument between David and Celeste leading up to the night of April 23rd, when she allegedly died at his hands. So hearing this now and seeing all of this actually in print on the overhead monitor in the courtroom, it adds a little bit more color and life to this.
And to be clear, the reason this matters, it not only is potentially going to support the prosecution's narrative that he lured her there to kill her, but it goes to those special circumstances allegations, right? Lying in wait, killing for financial gain, killing a witness. All right, look, I know this is...
And in those messages, Celeste threatened him. She said she would ruin his career, contact his mother, reach out to his management team, tell people damaging things about him. But here is the detail that made the courtroom go quiet. At no point in those messages did she explicitly threaten to expose the fact that she was a minor or that their relationship was illegal. She alluded to it. She danced around it. But she never spelled it out.
/sidebar. I do have a question about this, though. When she claimed in these messages, or allegedly claimed in these messages, that she was going to ruin his career, was it directly about their relationship? Did she say, I'm going to tell everybody that you've been with a minor. I'm going to tell everybody about our sexual relationship. Was it about that? Because that's what I thought, based on the prosecution's arguments and their filing before this preliminary hearing, that's what she specifically threatened.
There was a lot, Jesse, that was said in these text messages, and there was a lot that really was not spelled out. Keep in mind, too, a lot of this was typed out in Gen Z shorthand, in text message format, and it's little blips of back and forth. But let me tell you what these messages did not explicitly state. And this is what the defense brought up during their closing statements just now. Celeste did not, at any point during this back and forth, based on what we've seen in the courtroom today, explicitly threaten to disclose anything criminal about David. She did not spell that out, but what she's...
The defense hammered that point. and you could feel where they're heading. Because if Celeste was the aggressor that night, if she was the one who insisted on coming over, if she was the one making threats that could destroy his livelihood, then what happened inside that house might not look like premeditated murder. It might look like something else entirely. The defense hasn't officially declared self-defense, but they didn't need to. The questions they asked, the messages they highlighted, the way they cross-examined the medical examiner about the window of time it could have taken for Celeste to die. It's all pointing in one direction.
I want to get a little bit back into what the prosecution was arguing with Detective Farrell, but something else that really stuck out to me, they are mounting, as far as I can see, and I think the court referenced it, a potential self-defense argument. I mean, when I'm reading these messages, there was an aspect to it, and correct me if I'm wrong, did Celeste physically, or are they trying to suggest Celeste physically threatened David, and that perhaps when she got to his house, he acted in self-defense? Am I looking at this completely wrong?
You're not. We've talked about a couple different defenses that attorneys have been, I think, either laying the foundation for or exploring as a potential option if or when this does go to trial. And I think this self-defense argument may be the one they have the strongest foundation for right now. As to the point you're making about physical assaults from Celeste, that was actually stricken from the court record this morning. The judge explained she is the victim here. She is not being charged with assaults. So until this goes to trial and the defense is presenting a self-defense argument, that's simply irrelevant. But that did come up. And it sounds like there may be evidence relating to that we could hear at a later date. But to your point, too, Jussie, about that surveillance footage or lack thereof, absolutely. I mean, there is irrefutable hard evidence for so many other things, right? Phone records, Tesla records, text messages that spell out what people were saying and doing at specific times. There is no surveillance footage actually showing David or Celeste going into or coming out of the Doheny Place home where he was staying at the time. The LAPD detective, Corey Farrell, the final witness for the prosecution during this preliminary hearing, he spoke to that today. And he laid out what I thought was a very reasonable explanation. He says by the time they tried to access that security system to search for that video, it had been so long, it had been months, and the system simply overwrote itself. It wasn't stored there anymore. Now, we don't know if somebody may have gone back and deleted that. We don't know if the cameras may have been turned off during that time. All we know is there is no video. So what the prosecution has been alleging this whole time, that David stood by and watched.
Now, the prosecution's story is this: David ordered the Uber that brought Celeste to his home, let her in, and sometime in the next hour and a half, killed her. His phone and his Tesla left the house at 11:30 p.m. and traveled north to Lake Cachuma, where her passport card was later found. Her dismembered remains were discovered months later, in the front trunk of that same Tesla, abandoned in a tow yard. They argue he lay in wait, that he killed a witness to his crimes, that he did it to prevent financial loss. All special circumstances that make this a death penalty eligible case. But there are holes. The Uber driver remembers nothing. There is no surveillance footage of Celeste arriving or leaving, or of David being at the house at the relevant time. The security system had overwritten itself by the time investigators accessed it. The medical examiner couldn't determine which wound came first, how long it took her to die, or even what kind of weapon caused the penetrating injuries. The body was too decomposed.
Your medical examiner, right? The medical examiner said that we don't know how long it took for Celeste to succumb to her injuries, right? So this idea that you claim our client was watching her bleed out, it seems that it's complicated by the ME's testimony, right?
That's right. I mean, he testified the other day, either one of those two penetrating wounds that they attributed her death to, either one could kill somebody in, quote, minutes to an hour. That is a pretty wide window of time. And he simply can't say, and that's because of the advanced state of decomposition. She may have been dead for weeks to months before her body was found. We saw in very graphic imagery exactly what her body looked like when the pieces were found in body bags inside that vehicle. So he can't say which penetrating wound happened first. It took them about 3 months just to finalize their autopsy findings and confirm her cause of death. So he doesn't know what kind of instrument or weapon caused those injuries. The body goes through a lot of change post-mortem.
Sure.
So
So the prosecution's theory that David watched her bleed out without calling for help. It's an inference, not something they can prove with video or eyewitness testimony. I want to pause here and ask you something directly, because this is exactly the kind of detail that armchair investigators live for. If you were sitting in that courtroom, which piece of missing evidence bothers you more, the fact that the Uber driver has no recollection of that trip, or the fact that the entire home surveillance system just happened to overwrite itself before investigators could pull the footage? Neither one proves anything on its own, but one of them feels like bad luck, and the other feels like something else entirely. I want you to think about that, and I want you to tell me in the comments which one you find harder to accept. I read every single one, and I know this audience catches things I might miss. The prosecution also introduced testimony about Celeste's family. Her parents, aunts, cousins, and older sister were reportedly aware she spent time with David. They knew she went to the mall, to the movies, traveled with him. The defense used this to suggest that maybe the family wasn't alarmed by the relationship. Maybe they even consented to it. But as the DA pointed out repeatedly, none of that matters. A minor cannot consent. A family cannot consent for her.
Today, several different ways. It does not matter how old Celeste told David she was. That does not absolve him of these child sexual abuse charges. It does not matter if she lied to him about her age and said she was 18 when she was 13. That does not change the factual substance surrounding that particular charge, sexual abuse of a minor under 14. It also does not matter that her parents consented to letting her travel with him. It also does not matter that her parents, her aunts, her cousins, and apparently her older sister were aware that she spent time with him, went to the mall with him, went to the movies with him. That does not make it okay
and
for
if
him.
David was having sex with a 13-year-old, the law does not care if he thought she was 18 or if her parents approved. That charge is airtight, and the judge had no trouble binding him over on it. What the judge had to weigh on the murder count was probable cause, an exceedingly low standard, as she reminded the courtroom, and she found it. She found enough to send this to trial, enough to keep him held without bail, enough to set an arraignment for August 31st.
Continue into Tuesday morning.
Julia Dang, thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate it. So after I finished up with Julia, this is what came out of court. The judge found that there is sufficient cause to believe the defendant is guilty and to move this trial on all 3 counts, talking about how such a low standard it is. The judge reminded this is an exceedingly low standard, sufficient cause to hold someone to answer, again, probable cause. Apparently, David was staring straight ahead at the judge with his arms folded in front of him as she was reading this case, the law notes, court decisions. So yes, the judge found that there's sufficient probable cause. This is going to move forward. And it appears that an arraignment on these charges is going to be held on Monday, August 31st at 8:30 a.m. Bail has been denied, and there was also reporting from Julia that David was nodding rapidly as his attorney was whispering to him before waiving the speedy arraignment. So again, Monday, August 31st arraignment at 8:30 a.m. Prosecution agreed, and now we're going to move forward. Now, before we wrap things up, here is Los Angeles District Attorney Nathan Hochman outside the courthouse after the court's decision.
Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Hochman. I'm the Los Angeles County District Attorney. Today I am here to announce that Judge Charlene Olmedo held David Anthony Burke, who goes by the name of a singer David spelled D4VT, to answer for the horrific and barbaric killing of a 14-year-old at the time, Celeste Rivas Hernandez. She has held him to answer for first-degree murder with the special circumstances of lying in wait, doing this crime for financial gain, and murdering a witness to an investigation. David Anthony Burke has also been held to answer for the mutilation of the remains of Celeste Rivas Hernandez on September 8th, 2025.
DA Nathan Hochman came out afterward and said something that stuck with me. The evidence presented at this hearing was only a small fraction of what they have. At trial, they'll bring everything.
So the other idea that you need to have is that a preliminary hearing is not designed for the prosecution to present all its evidence. Mr. Quealy is correct from the Los Angeles Times that there was additional evidence that was actually considered in this case that we anticipate being presented at trial. I'm not going to go into the specifics of that additional evidence, only to say that we presented a significant but small fraction of our evidence in this preliminary hearing. At a trial, we will present all our evidence because the proof at a trial will be beyond a reasonable doubt. We will not be allowed to use certain hearsay that you can use in a preliminary hearing that you cannot use in a trial. It has to be admissible evidence, and the witnesses will need to come in to establish all the foundation, the relevancy, and overcome any objections to the type of evidence. So you are correct that there will be additional and significant evidence presented at a trial that wasn't presented here at this preliminary hearing. I will take a question right here.
The evidence that we would see on Friday, I think was secret profit. Both of cases, how would you say the evidence in this case strikes you as other cases?
We believe that the evidence at trial will be overwhelming to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt on the three charges with which Mr. Burke will be charged. You got a small preview of some of that evidence, including the text messages and the video and photographic evidence that was also presented directly to the judge. This was difficult evidence to even hear, but also the crime that we are dealing with is incredibly horrific and barbaric. And it's not shocking that the evidence that would prove a horrific and barbaric crime would itself also.
Business records, percipient witnesses, evidence that goes directly to David's mental state. The holes we see now may not be holes by the time a jury is seated.
And at this point, we had to show it by probable cause. But by probable cause, and I would argue, by an overwhelming amount of probable cause, and we will eventually prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. It followed the timeline of the interactions between Celeste Rivas Hernandez when she started as a 12-year-old, then a 13-year-old, then a 14-year-old who never got to see her 15th birthday. Because in the intervening time where she had these interactions with Mr. Burke, he engaged in this sexual conduct with a 13-year-old repeatedly, over and over again. This came out in text messages that were presented, in videos and photographs that were presented to the judge that showed this sexual activity. Ms. Silverman methodically tracked the timeline of their interactions during 2022, 23, 24, 25 that eventually led to the time where Celeste Rivas Hernandez went over to Mr. Burke's house.
Here's what I think the defense will try to do.
So what we just heard from the defense before breaking for lunch, defense attorney Marilyn Bednarski was laying out 5 issues that she has with the prosecution's case. Essentially, she is alleging they don't have any evidence proving murder. She says they only have evidence that can support concealment and transportation of a body. They also spent quite a bit of time attacking the 3 special circumstances surrounding that first-degree murder charge that make it eligible for the death penalty. It seems like there's a lot of focus on that, and of course that's lying in wait, murder for financial gain, or in this case, murder to prevent financial loss, which the prosecution has established is essentially the same thing, and murder of a witness to a crime, which the prosecution...
They're going to argue that Celeste was the dangerous one, that she arrived uninvited, despite the Uber he paid for, that she attacked him, and that whatever happened next was not murder. They'll point to the lack of video, the unreliable Uber driver, the wide window of death. And honestly, it's not a weak argument if they can plant reasonable doubt. But the prosecution has one advantage that no amount of missing footage can erase: the Tesla. The car that moved with his phone. The car that contained her body. The car that sat in a tow yard for months with her remains inside, registered to him.
About that?
That's right. It came up again. This was from testimony that another LAPD expert spoke to a couple days ago last week during the first few days of this preliminary hearing. And in short, what that testimony established was that David's phone and David's Tesla were moving in the same place at the same time the night that Celeste was allegedly killed. So that came up again today, and they reminded the courts that as part of the prosecution's case, they found David's vehicle and his phone left his Hollywood Hills home at about 11:30 p.m., so about an hour and a half after Celeste arrived at that home, and then headed up to Lake Cachuma. Now
That car doesn't lie, and it doesn't forget. I don't know if the jury will see self-defense as a plausible explanation or as a desperate attempt to explain away the inexplicable. What I do know is that this trial will be one of the most closely watched in Los Angeles County. Celeste Rivas Hernandez never got to see her 15th birthday. Her parents sat in that courtroom listening to details no family should ever have to hear. And the person who will have to answer for all of it, David Anthony Burke, sat there taking notes, occasionally smiling, as if the gravity of what was happening had not fully reached him.
He's so interesting to watch, Jesse, because the responses, the reactions, I think you would expect from somebody in his position. We're not seeing those. I'm sitting at an angle, maybe about 15 to 20 feet behind him, so I can see from the side his facial expressions. You know, he walked in this morning, he was smiling, laughing a little bit, sidebarring with his attorneys. He's been sitting in his usual seat at the end of the counsel table, kind of staring straight ahead for most of today. He did start taking notes. That was something we didn't see during the first 3 days of this preliminary hearing, but he was jotting something down as they were going back and forth talking about the text message conversations. Beyond that, we haven't heard much from him. He's very still. He's not moving much. He's not fidgeting the way that he was on Friday when testimony was dissecting the child sexual abuse material found on his phone. But it's very interesting.
The truth is coming. The forensic evidence exists, the digital trails are preserved, and the trial will force every unanswered question into the light. I'll be here for every step of it, and when that verdict lands, you will hear it from me first. No flinching, No speculation, just the facts and what they demand. Until then, keep asking the hard questions. That's exactly what this case needs.